Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Sharon Fitzpatrick and I'm your co-host for today's webinar, Matching the Message to the Medium, Using Presentation Technologies to Wow Audiences, with Simon Morton and Andrew Warwick of Eyeful Presentations in the UK. Joining me as co-host is Dave Zielinski, the editor of Presentation Expert. Today's webinar is part of the Expert Thinking program, which offers a robust peer-to-peer community for presentation professionals to share ideas, resources, and start discussions. Join the Twitter conversation, tweet #PresentationExpert. It is my pleasure to introduce Dave Zielinski, the editor of Presentation Expert, my partner in crime on these webinars, and an award-winning writer. His book, Master Presenter, Lessons from the World's Top Experts on Becoming a More Influential Speaker, is a great resource. You can order it through Amazon or through a link on our website. Dave, turning it over to you.
Thanks, Sharon. I think we have a very timely topic for today's webinar. Looking forward to it. I'm pleased to introduce our two speakers today, Simon Morton and Alex Warwick. Simon's early career as an executive for a technology company exposed him to more PowerPoint presentations than were good for him. As founder of the UK-based firm Eyeful Presentations, Simon has been ridding the world of death by PowerPoint for over 10 years. In his new book, The Presentation Lab, Learn the Formula Behind Powerful Presentations, Simon shares the methodology and approach that has driven Eyeful's success and that of its world-class clients, including American Express, eBay, Delta Airlines, and many others. Joining Simon as speaker is Alex Warwick, Senior Designer of Eyeful Presentations. In his time at Eyeful, Alex has traveled far and wide to train clients in building more impactful PowerPoint presentations. Alex also was instrumental in the compelling presentation designs seen in the Presentation Lab book. With that, Simon and Alex, I'll turn it over to you, and good luck.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you both. Let me just get this up and running. There you go. Thank you very much to both Sharon and Dave for that lovely warm welcome. It's fantastic to speak to so many people today and share some of the insight that hopefully we've sort of pulled together over the last 11 years or so as Eyeful Presentations. The aim of today's presentation really is to prompt people to think just that little bit differently about the next presentation they're creating. We want to sort of spark a change, be the catalyst for change in the way that people think about preparing for their presentations, and most importantly, think about the way that they engage their audiences. If we can engage audiences differently, if we can really get them to connect with the presentation and the message, so many great things can happen, so many wonderful changes can occur. And that's really what we want to sort of touch on. Alex will be dipping in and out of various bits and pieces, and you'll hear his dulcet tones in due course. But just to sort of set things up, really, if I may, I'll just sort of touch on one of the exciting things that everybody on that long list that Sharon sort of read out, and the many people that are joining us from all over the world. We're in a really lucky and exciting time. As presentation professionals. The list that Sharon sort of read out was full of people that, like Alex and myself, have a real passion for presentations. And I don't know if you've witnessed it, but we've certainly seen it over the last 5 years or so. There's been a real revolution in the way that people engage and think about presentations. And that revolution has been sparked by technology, it's been sparked by things like TED Talks, a sense that presentations actually are important and that they do require the investment. And there's a general awareness now that presentations need to be taken very seriously, and when dealt with properly and managed properly, can have a huge impact on audiences and make real differences and real change. And so the presentation has brought with it some really good news, and the good news is that it's sort of hit us in many ways. We see this in the way that the people are now recognising the real basic laws that visuals are good and bullets are bad. When I started the business 11 years ago, a lot of my time was spent just trying to explain to people that a slide full of bullets was really not the best way to engage an audience and to get them on side, and certainly not the best way of ensuring that your message stuck with your audience. And like I say, the good news is that most people, if you sit them down now and spend any time with them, recognise, probably because they've sat through so many awful presentations, that visuals are good and bullets are bad. We also now have a younger generation. I'm probably showing my age now as much as anything, but we have a younger generation that is now entering the workforce, and this generation are a savvy bunch. They are visually very savvy. They get PowerPoint. They understand the power of visuals, and also very technically aware as well. And the three elements, being PowerPoint savvy, being technologically savvy, and visually literate, means that we've now got individuals joining companies large and small that understand things. They understand presentations, and to an extent, so they understand the power of strong visuals. And it's happening earlier and earlier. I'm a very proud father, as Alex is as well, and one of the proudest moments happened quite recently. I popped in to see my little 8-year-old boy who'd just come home from school and was in our den on the computer. And this time he wasn't playing an online game. He was creating a PowerPoint, and he was going and using PowerPoint to take snapshots from YouTube with a song that he liked, and he was taking screenshots from YouTube and then adding his animated lyrics underneath it at 8 years old. And I've never been prouder as a father, as you can imagine, a man that loves presentations as much as I do. And that generation is going to come through in due course. The people are not scared of presentations anymore. They're not scared of PowerPoint, and that's a wonderful place to be. Also, from a presentation perspective, we've never had it so good in terms of the tools that we have available to us. Almost weekly, there are new apps available on the iPad, online, amazing technology, things like eMaze. If you've had opportunities to play around with that, there's some really cool stuff there. The ability to jump on pretty much any platform, be it an Android or an Apple iPad, and on the fly create content that can be used in the presentation. Like I say, we've never had it so good. There are some frustrations, and we'll touch on those later on, and there's almost a danger that so many technology options out there have actually limited our ability to really think deeper, but we'll touch on that sort of later on in the webinar. We should also recognise that we now, as a generation of presenters and presentation creators, have got people that we can look up to. We have heroes now. Steve Jobs, we all are very aware of his skills as an orator. But more importantly, I think for the people on this webinar, and certainly for the gang here back in the UK at Eyeful, is we recognise that Steve Jobs also publicised what good looks like in terms of presentations. So books have been written. I'm sure many of you have read the Carmine Gallo book around Steve Jobs and the fine work that Carmine's done in documenting that. But for me, Steve Jobs represents more than just a great presenter. It's about his approach to presentations. And the fact that he in himself was such an icon means that our audience, our customers, are aware that they have to up their game. And that, coupled with the incredible success of TED Talks, means that we're now in a position where when we're developing presentations on behalf of other people, we can have that very firm, very grown-up conversation that says, we don't just want to put lipstick on a pig. What we want to do is make sure that your story really engages and resonates with your audience, that we develop a presentation experience that gives them a message that they can take and share with other people. And so that's the good news. Technology is on our side. The fact that people are now aware of it. Yeah, kind of. There's a very peculiar situation now where creating a great presentation is quite cool, and we've never ever had that experience previously. So that's the good news. Sadly, there is some bad news, and the bad news is there, and it prompts sessions like this. If everything was perfect, we wouldn't need to carve an hour out of our day to listen to a webinar. Everything would be wonderful, but the problem is we actually do have a whole series of new issues coming to the fore and rising as a result of new technology, a new generation of people coming through, and stylized presentations being seen as something for people to aspire to. We talk quite deeply in the book about our concern of style over substance. So visually savvy, PowerPoint and technology savvy sort of generation coming through are excited by what they can do in terms of visual treatments of slides. And that's great as long as it doesn't take over the purpose of the slide or the visual that you've created. The purpose of a strong visual in a presentation is to help you share your message. It is not there to demonstrate what a dab hand you are at PowerPoint. The only purpose of a PowerPoint slide is to assist the presenter in sharing their message. And my fear, and we've seen this come through with people that we look to potentially join our business, but certainly when we go into some of our larger clients that have their own in-house presentation resource, is sometimes the tail is wagging the dog, and you're ending up with people that are seeing PowerPoint and the other tools as an opportunity to become the next Banksy rather than actually develop a visual that really engages with an audience and helps the presenter get their message across. And I know this is one of the areas that Alex is going to be covering off when he talks through some worked examples that we've done using different technologies. It's not just about grabbing hold of the technology and making it look cool. There are design and communication principles that we need to apply as well to make sure that those tools are used in the most appropriate fashion. I mentioned the tail wagging the dog, and I think it's probably a good example is Prezi. Now, we like Prezi. We've got a Prezi example coming up shortly that we'll share with you. For those people that perhaps haven't had the opportunity to play with Prezi or really get to grips with it, it's an alternative to PowerPoint and Keynote and the many other tools that are out there, and its approach is very different. It works almost as a canvas where you move around the canvas, and as a result, the engagement and the visual sort of share with the audience is quite a different experience, and that works really well for certain things. The problem that we've seen is that many people have seen Prezi as the antidote to bad PowerPoint presentations, and we all know that there are thousands, probably millions of bad presentations being delivered every day and every week around the world. The way to address those bad PowerPoint presentations isn't to take that badly structured, confused content and stick it into another technology. It's actually to take a step back and try and understand why the presentation generally wasn't working. And so what we're starting to see now is that where people had bad PowerPoints, they've turned them into bad Prezis. And we're now seeing death by Prezi as opposed to death by PowerPoint. It's not the software's fault, it was never PowerPoint's fault, and it's certainly not Prezi's fault. Prezi is a great tool in the right hands when used at the right time, and hopefully we'll be able to share some of that with you. The other issue is that there's a technology blindness now. It's become almost an addiction. The latest technology that's released, the latest versions of whatever software you happen to find out on the web are being grabbed without any real consideration for the audience, without any real consideration for what makes a great presentation and being used blindly. And so we have to really address that at the most basic level. And the purpose of this webinar is as much to get everybody to sort of go back to basics. Forget the technology. Do what Gar Reynolds says in Presentation Zen. Go analog before you even think about applying your message visually to whatever medium that you choose to use. We have a diagram that we've used for many, many years. Anybody that's heard or seen me speak previously will be sort of familiar with this particular graphic, and it's as old as the business is, and we keep coming back to it because for me this is the fundamental set of ingredients that make a great presentation. The problem that we've had to date, the bad news that's come off the back of the presentation revolution, is the fact that people have focused purely on how a presentation is delivered, and they've not focused on content, and they've not had any thought around message. Many of the new opportunities that come our way as a firm here in the UK are people calling up in a panic because they've got a very important presentation due and their slides look awful. And it would be very easy for us to take that opportunity, put it into our studio full of great people like Alex, and get it processed, and it comes out the other end looking prettier. The slides will look prettier, but the presentation won't be any more effective. And this is why we've got to go right back to basics.
Simon, I wanted to kind of
yes,
I wanted to interject because we've had a couple of questions, and I think that this is really a good point. You've seen it all. I mean, you've seen the good, the bad. So what are some of the issues the biggest issues that you see both within your organization and with some of your clients that you see facing presentations time and time again?
It's a really good question, and that's a whole webinar. I'd say my biggest beef is the fact that people have fallen into the trap of seeing presentations as a generic thing. And so, as you can imagine, we do a lot of presentations with sales teams and create presentations that help the sales teams engage with their prospects. And they will come to us and say, we need the sales deck. And our pushback always to them is, we can give you the core sort of deck of slides that help you engage and tell your story, but your audience is by far the most important part of this mix. And so creating a generic catch-all presentation and then assuming that it's going to work with a wide variety of audiences is probably the biggest problem people have made. Like I said earlier, the good news is we don't have to fight the battle now of bullets are bad and visuals are good. I think everyone's woken up to that fact. But they're now falling into the trap of, if I've got something cool on the slide, on the screen, then actually I can talk around that and I can talk to any audience. And actually, our view very much is that the presentation has to be audience-centric. The most important stakeholder in any presentation isn't your boss, it isn't the product manager, it isn't the marketing team, it's the audience. It's the audience that should determine absolutely what you do in terms of a presentation. And that goes all the way through to the tools that you choose to use, which is obviously an area that we'll be touching on later on.
I think you answered that brilliantly. I mean, I think many times we've all seen where, you know, content is king, but it may not be the right content for the right audience. And I think understanding who's in the room is really wonderful. So back to you, Simon.
Thank you. Oh, just to touch on that content piece, this probably won't resonate with too many people. So I'm kind of contradicting what I said about making sure that it relates to the audience. But there's an old school comedy duo here in the UK. Called Morecambe and Wise, and one of the lines that old people like me remember is from a sketch where they were playing the piano really badly, and when I'm speaking to UK clients, I use this line, and the line is, "You're playing all the right notes, just not necessarily in the right order. And that happens a lot in presentations. So when you come to that content piece of this sort of tripod of elements that make up a great presentation, you might have the right content in there, but if you're not delivering it at the right time, if it's not supporting your message in the right way, it's wasted content, it's noise that actually is going to get in the way of you engaging with your client. By far, the most important part of these three elements, in my opinion, is message. And message is the most difficult part to get right. Yeah, there will be great designers listening to this webinar now that know how to make a presentation look amazing. The biggest challenge is getting your clients, getting your boss or what have you to ensure that they've got a really clear message. And the importance of the message is twofold. One is it's the bit that your audience will remember. The very worst thing that can happen is 2 weeks after the presentation, if you called up a member of your audience and said, what do you remember about my presentation? If they come back to you and say, oh yeah, you're the guys that do X, Y, and Z, great, you've nailed it. If they come back and say, oh yeah, you're the guys with the really cool slides, well, it demonstrates that you know PowerPoint really well, but you didn't deliver your message. You haven't transferred the message over to your audience. And so frankly, there's very little chance that they're going to do what you want them to do. So that's one important part of message. The other really important part of message and really useful part of message is when you have a clear message, it helps you pick the right content. Content is the stuff that gums up the wheels of a presentation. Nancy Duarte, who's a hero to many of us, she talks about killing your babies or killing your darlings. And by that, she's saying, get rid of the stuff, the clutter, the noise in your presentation that's getting in the way of you engaging with your audience. It's a wonderful way and wonderful phrase to prompt people to go, that content I'm really just sharing because it demonstrates how much I know, or it demonstrates how much work I put into this presentation. But if it's not helping you demonstrate and secure the message transfer over to your audience, get rid of it. You don't need it. And then that final piece, the design piece, that's the mechanic by which you can visualize sort of your key messages. I've had the lovely experience of meeting people that I presented to 2 or 3 years previously, and they come up and they say, oh, you're the guy with the shed story. And there's a long and long story that I was presenting 2 or 3 years ago, a story based around a shed and how a presentation was like a garden shed. They remembered that 2 or 3 years later. They remembered what that shed represented and why it was so important for people to get their heads around it. That is the power of a strong, well thought out message, and that's exciting. But this is really easy to talk about in isolation. The problem that we all face is that our audiences are now more bombarded with content than ever before. I thought it was really interesting. You guys have had the big news recently of David Letterman and his final TV show, which I guess was last night. We know of Letterman over here, and he was interviewed for something on the BBC News website, and he was saying that TV over his tenure has changed quite dramatically. And where previously people would sit and they would watch the TV and he had their attention, he said, yeah, my competition is not necessarily the other channels, it's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's all the social media. It's the fact that people can jump to something on YouTube of something I talked about 3 years ago. There's a whole heap of things that he's got to try and battle against. And that's David Letterman. Yeah, we as presenters don't necessarily have the same attention or engagement as Mr. Letterman does. We've got to fight against exactly the same thing. I'm aware now, and I might be setting myself up here awfully, but I'm aware now that on a webinar there are going to be people that are listening with one ear, but also maybe checking an email out or what have you. You have to be aware of that and then deliver your message and your story in as engaging a way as you possibly can. So I've painted quite a sort of downbeat vision of where we are. The presentation revolution has been really positive in many ways, but it has come with some real baggage that we need to deal with. And in terms of engaging with that message, how are we going to get that message through? Well, we have a solution. That solution is about celebrating the changes that we've experienced, but remembering those fundamentals. And the biggest fundamental, I've touched on this a couple of times already, is getting your head around the audience. The audience, I say this probably 20 or 30 times a day. What's in it for the audience? Explain to me what you know about the audience. The audience is the most important stakeholder. We are obsessively audience-centric here at Eyeful in the way that we develop our designs, the way that we engage with our clients, the way that we ensure our clients are engaging with their audiences. And we've tried to build a couple of quick ways of just prompting people to think about those audiences quickly. And the way that we've done that is by creating something called an audience heat map. If anybody's had an opportunity to read the book, they'll be aware of how this works. This is a mechanism by which we can prompt people just to take a moment out and think a little bit deeper than the stereotypes that they might have in mind. So this is a perfect example, actually. This is a heat map that we created for a US client that was pitching to a large bank. And we said, look, your audience will be made up of 3 different behaviours. There will be some predominant behaviours in that audience, but it will be a mixture of all these 3. The factual behaviour within your audience will be that type of sort of information that needs to be delivered. I want to see numbers. If I could present on a spreadsheet, that would be great. That part of that audience wants to see that level of detail. The emotional side of things is, the emotional side is sort of that gut feel, that very sort of animal response. It could be positive, it could be negative. And then finally visionary, and visionary is the big picture stuff. So from an emotional perspective, it might be that you've got people that are excited about what they think you've got to share, or there may be those people that are seeing this as just a real waste of time, a real headache for everybody to get involved with. And then the visionary piece, like I say, is that big picture stuff. This is a heat map that we created, we created it for this US client of ours. And we'd made some assumptions based on the job titles of the people our client was presenting to. And frankly, they were the wrong assumptions to make. They were pitching to procurement, they were pitching to bankers, and they were pitching to finance guys. And so very, very high on factual. This is actually a slightly, I should have tweaked this particular heat map, because actually the emotional was very, very small. There was not a lot of emotional on our original heat map, because we thought it's a procurement audience. They just want to know the numbers. They want to really just get to what deal can they do, and there's not a huge amount of emotional engagement there at all. And then the visionary piece was quite big. We were asking, or our client was asking their audience to spend a lot of money with them, and so we had to sell the big picture by implementing their solution, what would they get and what have you. The reality was that we had it wrong, and halfway through running the workshop with our client, I said, look, I'm really struggling to get my head around what our audience looks like and what they're feeling, because I just feel like we're going through the motions. And actually, the presentation was a lot different. These are actually the wrong way around, so apologies. The emotional was a lot higher. Because actually the audience knew the prices, they understood the reason for buying it. All of those boxes had been ticked prior to this big presentation. Actually, it was now down to how could they emotionally engage with the our customer, the people that we're pitching to them? Could they trust them? Could they work with them? Could they go through some of those really tough times when a project goes over some bumpy road and actually come out the other end still friends? And for me, just having the ability to think about an audience in a different way makes a huge difference, and that's what we need to be doing. We need to be thinking about how our audience really engages, and frankly, by doing that, we can start thinking a little bit deeper about some of the big things that make a difference to them. You know, they wanted to know they could trust our client rather than just sort of bowl ahead, and that was an important thing. Audience is such an important part of the process that actually we've extended it now to the way that we should be, not just be thinking about the story and the structure and the messaging of a presentation, but also the way that we share that information with them. And this is one of the areas that I get kind of evangelical about, because I feel really excited about the fact that we've identified a change that's been happening over the last 5 or so years that makes a huge difference to the effectiveness of presentations. Let me share it with you. We call it the presentation landscape, and fundamentally it's based around the fact that a lot of presentation thinking, a lot of presentation books and videos and great thought leaders focus very much on what we call the formal presentation, that one-way lecture. It's almost a broadcast to an audience. So this is kind of formal. There's some interaction, but not as much as if we were all sat together in a room, and certainly not if we were sat together and there might have just been 5 or 6 of us. We would have had more of a conversation, but we're speaking to hundreds of people on this webinar. Can't quite recall what the number was. Hundreds of people on this webinar, and so we have to broadcast the information that we're sharing, which is fine. And that's good. And if you're at a conference, it's a formal presentation. It's a broadcast. However, many of the presentations that we create here at Eyeful, and I know many of you will be creating all around the world, don't really fit into that model. Yeah, and that's where PowerPoints and the other tools can become a real obstacle for a presenter, because it means that actually they're fighting against the technology rather than working with it. So if a client, if an audience member asks a question, suddenly the poor presenter goes and has a cold sweat and starts worrying about all manner of, well, I know the slide's there somewhere, and they escape out of it and they have to scroll their way through. The whole thing looks horribly unprofessional. They lose the flow, the audience gets antsy, the whole thing falls apart. What we need to do is we need to find a way of helping people in those situations use a tool that helps those two-way discussions, that means that they're able to dip in and out of content in line with their audience's requirement. They're still taking their audience on a journey from A to Z, but they're meandering. They're taking the pretty route based on the questions that are being asked of them by their audience. Still got control, but the audience is now very much prompting the discussion. They're engaged. They're not tuning out because they're being talked at. They're actually engaged with this and actually asking the questions that are most relevant to them. And this works in all sorts of different presentations. It naturally has a huge benefit when it comes to sales presentations, but we've seen this work really effectively with internal presentations where a message is being shared, but a discussion has been prompted. So people are able to question and ask and prod and probe and get to the point where they really understand the message, rather than it sort of washing over them because it's an internal presentation and they've just got to kind of grin and bear it and tune out. You can take this all the way through to informal presentations. And Dan Rome, and again, if anybody's had the opportunity to read any of Dan's work, it's fantastic in allowing people the ability to share their message using visuals on the back of a napkin. Sometimes, excuse me, sometimes when we're presenting, we don't need the technology. We need to make sure that we're engaging with our audience, and the introduction of a PowerPoint or a laptop would kill that engagement stone dead. we've got to be able to ensure that presenters are equipped to deal with and share their message in the way that's most appropriate to their audience and the way that their audience are feeling. If I'll share a personal story. We had somebody come into Eyeful to pitch for some services. They were selling us some HR services, and the lady that had come in to present was fantastic, really, really good. She was presenting to myself and one of the other directors, and did a wonderful job in building rapport, learning about our business, sharing what made her business different and why it was such a wonderful fit for our business and why we should be spending money with us. And she had us eating out of her hand. She was a brilliant salesperson. She'd done all of this stuff, and just when I thought, okay, well, we're coming to the end, she said, right, I'd now like to go through our PowerPoint presentation to make sure that we've covered all the bases. And she pulled out her laptop and started going through some slides. Not only were the slides awful, I mean, the presentation was dreadful, but by introducing this tool really completely out of context, it put a barrier between us who were we're about to sign the check, and her who was looking to engage with us. And I asked afterwards, I said, we will go with you despite the fact that your presentation was truly awful and it felt really incongruent. Explain to me why you felt the urge to whip out your PowerPoint and start going through that. And the answer she gave me shocked me. She said, my boss, our sales director, says we have to go through a PowerPoint presentation with every customer or prospect that we speak to. And it hit me really hard. Anybody else would have lost the deal if she hadn't been so good up front. And she was inappropriately using technology that would have cost her the deal. Yeah, and it's really important to, if she just had a conversation with us at that informal phase, maybe moving towards interactive, she'd had the tools to help us, help her respond to some of the questions that we had, she would have been a lot more powerful. The good news is, as presentation professionals, as we all are on this webinar, the good news is that there are some constants across this landscape. It's the same story. And it's the same message. So if you're looking to share your message on a podium to 1,000 people at a conference, or to somebody over a coffee using nothing more than a pen and a napkin, your story should be the same. Your message should be the same. The way you engage with your audience and share that information with them, that's the stuff that differs. And if you get that right, the impact is huge. The message retention goes through the roof. The quality of the communication, because it's on the terms of the audience, is a big sort of step forward. And there's better engagement between presenter and audience, and that makes a big difference. We call having that mixture of different tools to engage with your audience something called blended presenting, which is basically a toolkit. You can have a PowerPoint, a tablet version, a phone version, a Prezi version of the same presentation, and then you use those tools when it's most appropriate and when it best meets the needs of your audience.
And I think this is a perfect place to kind of poll our audience a little bit and see what technology they've used to create presentations in the last 6 months, and then we'll share the results with everyone.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah, thank you.
There is definitely a poll that's come up. Please feel free to check, and you'll see I've said check all that apply. We obviously know PowerPoint is going to be 100%, but we really want to know what else you're doing as well. So we've got about 53% of you that have voted, so let me give it about another 20 seconds. Simon, between Prezi and tablets, what do you think it's going to come out? What do you think?
Oh, it's a really good question. I think probably tablets just by a nose.
Okay.
I think a lot of people will have probably tinkered, I don't know if that phrase translates, but tinkered with Prezi, but in terms of using it in a real life sort of environment, I don't know that Prezi is as prevalent as we might think. And I think a lot of people love their tablets and hopefully are using them more and more.
Well, I'm going to close the poll and I'm going to share the results. And you're pretty close. I mean, it's 20% for tablets, 19% for Prezi, and of course 100% for Microsoft PowerPoint. So definitely people are starting to experiment with other ways to create presentations.
Which is wonderful. That's the positive side of this revolution that we've been talking about, is the fact that we've got more stuff to play with. It's really exciting. We've just got to make sure that the tail doesn't wag the dog. Now, one of the reasons I asked Alex to join me on this webinar is that it will allow us to sort of share some of the different ways that we develop presentations. So what we've got here is a couple of scenarios using different technology but the same story. So just a bit of background sort of information. I asked Alex, I drew a very, very bad storyboard, which is typically what I do anyway, a very bad brief to poor Alex, and said, look, I want this message delivered in a couple of different ways. I want to be able to deliver it the conventional way, using PowerPoint. I also want to be able to share it on a tablet. So can you develop it with a tablet user and a tablet audience in mind? And finally, can you develop it in Prezi for me as well? And the story, as you'll see in a second, Alex will talk you through it, is very, very simple. It's basically a pitch. I've come up with a super duper new widget, and I'm going to pitch for investment. And it's a very short, very tongue-in-cheek presentation. But the idea is that you know, we've got a couple of different flavors of this. First up is PowerPoint, and PowerPoint I would suggest is best used for formal presentations, so that broadcast type of presentation. They can also be used for interactive, and we'll touch on that in a second, but from that formal presentation, I'll hand over to my friend and my colleague, Alex, and allow you to sort of kick things off. Tell me when to click.
Okay. In fact, shall I take charge of the clicking?
I think you should. It's probably a good idea.
Okay, hi everyone. Okay, firstly, like I mentioned to all my project managers and clients, the first couple of slides are vitally important. They establish the look and feel for the rest of the slides. For designers to have a good look and feel that they are confident with is so important at the start of each project. I've had many jobs where the look and feel is a little loose and the whole project can suffer because the key effort has not been put in during the first few slides. I also find that if you lock in a great distinct look, the other people who pick up the project can normally do it a lot easier. Okay, before I go into the details about why I designed these slides the way I did, I would like to point out that design is pretty subjective. Which is why it's also important, even if you're confident with it as a designer, to get others to look through your work and not take offense to blunt feedback at times. Hopefully you'll see a bit of method behind my madness and realize there is some science behind these designs. Okay, so with these slides, I've used a set of highly contrasting colors. The dark gray with the white text, the strong blue, the standout yellow, even a little bit of pink in there. I generally choose dark grey over black because I believe a solid black can look a bit harsh, where the dark grey just takes the edge off it a little but still does the contrasting job that I need it to. I've used Verdana font throughout to avoid any problems with non-standard fonts. It's the safest way is to use a Microsoft pre-installed font that all users will have. It's actually slightly different if you're using a tablet and you're converting a presentation to HTML5, because once you've converted it, it just turns your fonts into pictures, so you won't have any issues with that. I can't say I've got a preference for particular fonts, but I felt Verdana gave a strong, bold look that I was after in this particular case. I've used the Eyeful Presentations logo on the front page. You can see it in the top left-hand corner, but only on the front page. I am actually a believer that it shouldn't be standard practice to place logos on every slide. I have simplicity at the core of every presentation I do, reducing the noise and clutter of the slides as it can take away from the message. I'm actually in Simon's office right now, sat opposite a poster of Charles Mingus. It's a quote from Charles Mingus, the jazz musician, which says, "Anyone can make the simple complicated. Creativity is making the complicated simple." Now, that's pretty much my job. You know, presentations can be quite complicated, and I feel my job is to make it as simple and as manageable as possible to get the message across. Okay, so apart from the front and back cover, I don't believe that most presentations need a logo. Your branding is on the slides without the repetitive advertising that may build a subtle resistance to you and your presentation. Remember, the presentation is for the audience. Okay, I am actually aware from looking at the other slides that we don't always practice what we preach. We have actually got our logo on the bottom corners of our template. But the way I can describe that is actually a well-designed template. It has got a logo placeholder. It's a very clean template, so we can get away with it.
We'll change that for the next one. Don't worry about that. No, good shout.
Okay, another quick thing to mention, which may be lost on some people, is the word widget throughout. You'll see it appears in yellow. This is to make sure it subtly stands out wherever it appears in the presentation. Normally when you're delivering presentations, a lot of the audience probably won't pick up on things like that, but as a designer, it's the little bits which make the difference. Okay, I've used the bubbles as part of the design theme. You can see the bubbles behind our Eyeful hexagon. This just matches the presentation lab visuals that I helped Simon with on his book. This is just to add a bit of continuous movement on a title slide. It's purely for when the audience is sitting down, getting ready for the presentation, looking at the presentation title. It just adds a little bit of interest. Okay. So after the bold title page, I go to the idea slide. This is to introduce what the widget is. I've started this slide with a flash transition. This picks up on the bright parts of the slide as I've input the light bulb as a blurry black and white image. It's picked up on the light parts of the light bulb, then with the hexagon wiping over, the color version appears. This is to show that the idea is given color and life to the image. It's a designer's way of showing visually this idea. Okay, I've used a big light bulb, which is commonly recognized for idea, and I've put the words extra and hour behind and in front of it. With this, I've attempted to visually represent the idea being it is giving you an extra hour. Okay, with the extra hour behind the light bulb, an hour in text, the hour text in front is added some depth and interest to what could be seen as a cliched image. This style is currently a design trend. As a designer, I constantly look at creative blogs, websites, etc. for any design trends and try and implement them into presentations when I can. It just keeps things fresh. Not all of them work. It's good to keep trying new ideas to easily get, otherwise you easily get into the trap of using basic images and text boxes when designing slides. So it just keeps my creative juices flowing to just have a few ideas for inspiration. Okay. Going on to the next opportunity slide, I've used a push transition so the audience isn't distracted with a harsh end to the slide. With this transition, it smoothly blends one slide into the next. I've used a color scheme to tint the images and again have wrapped the hexagon slightly around the image to give it a slight sense of depth. I had the hexagon and text build around the image that was already on the screen because I believe sometimes it's a good idea to have the image first on the screen to add a sense of intrigue before the text makes it obvious. But hopefully the presenter will be talking around these particular things in a little bit more detail. Okay, moving on to the next slide again, using the push transition for consistency, I've wiped on the iMac as the hexagon transitions and added a simple diagram showing the mess before the widget. This is a perfect opportunity to add a click to replace the pre-diagram with the post-widget diagram. Using the same messy circles of the diagram, I've used motion paths to tidy them up so it all looks smooth and seamless on the screen. I've used a big font size for how and smaller for it works in the right hand side on the yellow hexagon. It's always a good idea in my mind to add a size hierarchy to all the items on the screen, especially the text. How stands out because this is the how the widget works slide. This is the key message of this slide. The angle is also the same as the text on the hexagons as the previous slide, so it's good to keep that consistency. Okay, moving forward again, the same consistent push transition with the hexagon changing colour to give this particular slide a new theme colour, which is the pink. Again, I've tinted the images the same as the other ones. It's all about consistency. I always say when I'm training people in PowerPoint that if you've got a slide deck of 50 or 100 slides and you're slightly out with your alignment or your colours, you know, after a while it can look very messy. So consistency really is the key to what you do with the design. With regards to images, this is normally a bit of a time stealer if looking for specific images. Luckily, we've got quite an extensive image library in the studio, but we still spend quite a long time going through free image sites like Pixabay, freeimages.com, and Google Images labeled for reuse. I would always advise that if the image is particularly specific, perhaps look to get a budget and buy some images. There's some great stock images about. They can add a lot of weight to the design and the message if the right one is used. Okay, back to the slide. I've used quick animations to bring up all the elements quickly. With animations, it's a really fine line between bringing things up on the screen at a pace that people can read one by one, or bringing them up quickly so all the information is on the screen. We try and avoid slow builds that are too fast to read but not fast enough so it feels like the animation is slow and getting in the way of the content. Hopefully that makes sense. Primarily the use of animation is to make sure the content you want on the slide at a specific time is there and timed to perfection. Okay, so to the last slide, I've seamlessly faded away the why invest content and replaced it with a quite literal and cheesy next step slide. This is a perfect opportunity to add some subtle branding into the images before the audience leaves.
So that's your typical PowerPoint pitch, the sort of presentation that you would deliver in a formal environment where you're talking to the audience and then hopefully getting some questions at the conclusion of it. One of the tools that was great, it was kind of spooky that slightly more people have used and looked to play with tablets rather than Prezi. We've got a short video, and I think just in terms of how we've run this video in the past, and we'll run as it's sort of as we're chatting through. What were the considerations you had when preparing for the tablet presentation?
Well, the main consideration was the screen ratio. Here at Eyeful especially, we're trying to sort of tell our clients that 16 by 9 is a much nicer way to design the presentation. It looks better on widescreen monitors. It's a more natural way of looking. It's got that panoramic view that, you know, many films are filmed in. However, with the tablet, it's slightly different, because the tablet's quite a bit smaller. So if you're doing 16 by 9, you're actually losing the top and the bottom part of that tablet. So in this case, what I've done is I've actually edited the master. I've moved the top ribbon up, the bottom footer, I've moved it down, and I've given it more space on the screen. So when you're playing this on an iPad or another tablet, it doesn't look like there's a part of the tablet, a part of the presentation which is cropped off. It's actually making the most out of the space.
I guess the other thing, and again this is more from experience than anything, is some people are happy to click through a PowerPoint deck. It feels a little less natural if you're having a good interactive or informal conversation with somebody using the tablet to constantly be tapping away at the screen. So we tend to tie more timed animations into a tablet presentation than we would do maybe a more formal pitch presentation or sort of PowerPoint presentation. Final point, final example of this is Prezi. So we took exactly the same story, exactly the same message, and then applied it to a Prezi. And again, Alex, as you're chatting through, I'll just allow people to see the visuals sort of in play.
Okay, well, it seems like I think it was 20% of you have used Prezi, or near about 20% of you. So some of you are aware what it is, others of you might not be aware. It's pretty much a web-based presentation tool. Like Simon mentioned earlier, it uses a single canvas instead of slides, so it's not linear in any way. It's got some really great functions, the best of which has made it popular in the first place, which is the zooming capability. It looks nothing like PowerPoint. It's actually pretty simple to use as well. Having said that, it has also got its cons. The range of colours and fonts are limited, so sometimes difficult to stick to brand guidelines. I was recently on a webinar actually about Prezi, where I learned something that if you get in touch with Prezi and pay a few $100s, for example, on a premium account, they can actually set up a branding service which has got the correct colours, fonts, logos, etc. installed for you. Prezi also stumbles slightly with image sizes, and it can be slow to load, so you need to bear that in mind a lot more than when you're dealing with PowerPoint. Also, unless you've got a premium account and download your Prezi, you will need the internet to view it and edit it. Okay, with this particular Prezi, I've redesigned the content to suit the software. I've started with the title in big at the start, and built all the content around the widget wording, which is the main word of this presentation. I've, as well as using the zoom in function, also rotated 90 degrees at times to add some movement into the transitions. As Prezi can only fade on the content, the transition really is the best way to add some nice movement into the presentation. However, I suppose I should tell you to be aware that too much zooming and rotating, especially on large screens, can be a little bit nauseating for audiences. And remember, the audience is the key. Like all design, it's a fine line between success and failure. The zoom can be seen as a bit of a one-trick pony, but it can add a wow factor for certain jobs. I don't particularly see it as a PowerPoint killer. Certainly another aspect that you can use, another really good tool that you can use for the right job. It also works really well with relationship links for the content. So instead of slides, Prezi uses frames. So after designing the content on the canvas, you just add frames over the content and it will transition to those frames through the zoom and the rotate. So it's pretty easy to use. Especially after doing the PowerPoint version, I realized I could use quite a lot of the content and just put it into Prezi very simply. I think this one only took me about an hour, maybe an hour and a half to quickly put it together.
And I think that's the big thing from a blended presenting approach is if you have the story straight, sort of on paper, as in analog, applying it then to different technologies is pretty straightforward. What we've tried to come up with here is far from an exhaustive list, but a list that allows you to sort of figure out the types of different tools available to you for different types of presentations. So for those informal conversations and chats, just having a conversation, face-to-face, no visuals is an option. You don't have to introduce PowerPoint or what have you each and every time. I had somebody present to me informally recently, and they used their iPhone, and it was a really good, engaging way of that person actually visually being able to share their message with us. On the other side, on the formal sort of side of that presentation landscape, PowerPoint is still a very, very good tool. Videos, great. Hard copies, wonderful. Demoing stuff seems to have gone out of fashion recently, and it's something that we're very pro. I think if you can demo, be it software, be it a piece of machinery, it brings the whole thing to life. Webinars are a law unto themselves. It's about engaging and keeping your audience engaged through things like polls and questions. And you can tell that Sharon is a professional at this stuff. All the way through to the interactive, which is my personal favourite sort of development in the last few years, where we are creating, using tools like PowerPoint. We all have the ability, it's an inbuilt function within PowerPoint, the ability to drill down into detail when your audience requests that information. We're creating more and more toolkit type presentations now than ever before. And the power of that, especially when transferred over to tablets or utilizing some of the visuals to then whiteboard with a client, is incredibly powerful. I'm very aware of time, so just by way of sort of bringing it to a conclusion, we've spent the last hour sharing this, our insights from this lovely bubble that we sit in. We are blessed to immerse ourselves in the stuff that we really, really love, which is presentations. And people come to us when they really want that change to happen. But ultimately, a lot of you guys will be working in organizations where timelines don't necessarily give you the opportunity to make these big leap changes that we've talked through. So if you were going to take anything away from today's session, I'd strongly suggest scribbling down this diagram. Those three tenets of a great presentation: message, content, and design. They're the things that you need to bear in mind, and always, when you can, focus on that message. The message will be the thing that actually gives your presentation the focus, and the other elements then slot into that very, very nicely. It's always important to finish a presentation with a call to action, and our call to action is very, very simple. You've heard and seen different ways, different tools of telling the same story. Now's the time to embrace the power of presentations. Those people that you're working with, the audiences that you're presenting to, recognize the huge privilege a presentation actually represents. Embrace the opportunity, make sure that you make the most out of it. We may have said it a few times over the last hour, but just to reiterate, audience first. The audience is by far the most important stakeholder in the entire process. And then finally, we now have license to think beyond PowerPoint. As demonstrated by the examples that Alex shared with you and some of the thinking behind it, it was great to understand a designer's approach to creating a PowerPoint deck, but then equally how many of those elements and that thinking were then applied to creating a presentation that works on a tablet, and all the way through to Prezi and some of the vagaries of Prezi. Both Alex and I are incredibly grateful for the time you've given us. I'm aware that we're running slightly over. It's only right, and I believe I'm contractually obliged to mention that a lot of the stuff that we're sharing is available in the book, and we're also available for any questions. We love this stuff, so any questions people might have now or post-webinar, please ping them through to us. It's always a great pleasure to hear from people.
Simon, brilliant, and Alex, brilliant job. I thought you did phenomenal. We learned a lot. It was really interesting to kind of see the different transitions. Miguel, who is a frequent attendee of many of our webinars, had a point I want to share. He said, we can also use PowerPoint-made presentations, convert it to an HTML, and then deliver it with a tablet or smartphone. It's done easily and with no need of an internet connection, and that's just something else, another example of how we can wow our audiences using different mediums.
Absolutely. Yeah, and typically that's tablets have evolved really quickly, and so the good news is that PowerPoint apps are now available for Android and for iPads, sort of tablets. But Miguel, who's a good friend of ours, is absolutely right. If you want to safeguard that, exporting it out as an HTML5 file gives you all of the flexibility that you had in PowerPoint, and it is so robust on that tablet. Makes a big, big difference.
So since Miguel is a good friend, Alex, forgive this question. What you think about superimposed pink text or objects over an electric green background? Are you cringing yet?
Yeah, I'm probably having nightmares already.
I definitely know I would. So just a little fun there. But one more question. I know we're running really long. So Karina wants to know, how long generally does it take to create one slide with nice animations in transition? She's really curious because time crunches are the norm at her office.
Yeah, that's the biggest issue, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I'll let Alex answer that.
It depends on the content. It depends on the animations. I've had slides where it's been well over an hour, and I've got 8 years experience using this stuff. I think the design generally takes more time than actually producing it on the PowerPoint screen. I think that's the biggest time constraint.
One of the really interesting things, and hopefully, Corinne, this might be helpful, is that if you go into the studio here at Eyeful, where we've got our team of designers, you cannot move for paper. Scribbles and lots of doodles and what have you on everybody's desk. It looks an absolute mess, but it seems to be the most efficient way of actually designing, is rather than designing straight into PowerPoint, these guys spend a lot of time just doodling.
Yeah, I think we all do. I use Post-it notes. I will move Post-it notes around. How does things make sense? And then, you know, trying to figure out what the feel of the content is, and then trying to marry the right image and the right text to that message.
Exactly, and that, I think, probably, I'm putting words in Alex's mouth here, but I think that probably makes the design process more efficient, rather than doing your workings out on screen. Actually, by doing it on paper, when you finally get to the screen bit, that's relatively straightforward. Yeah, exactly what Simon says. We've actually, in the office as well, we've got some rub-out whiteboards and some, just whiteboards and pens that we all use for storyboarding and some ideas. And like Simon mentioned, the actual design process is generally a lot longer than putting it together on screen. The technical side of it speeds up a lot. The more experience, the more you play about with it, really.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's kind of interesting. You kind of look at the medium and decide kind of what and how it fits. And it's sometimes the simplest things that you do in order to make the message impactful that will really stand out in a presentation. I want to thank you both. This has been just terrific, and remind everybody that we will have this available for replay shortly. So check your email, you'll get a link to it. And then also let you know that we have a couple of great webinars coming up. We have next month, we're going to be doing the Orderly Conversation with Greg Owen Bozier, who's written a great book about it. Rick Altman is going to be joining us in July for doing a PowerPoint makeover. So if you have a PowerPoint, send it to webinars@presentationexpert.com and we'll make over a few. And then we're going to do something really unique in August. We're going to have a State of the Industry panel in anticipation of the Presentation Summit. So we can kind of talk about what the hot, cool topics are. And, you know, a lot of us are really looking forward to the summit this year. Guy Kawasaki is the keynote. So at this time, I'm going to say thank you and conclude the webinar. And thank you to everybody for sticking with us as we ran a little bit long. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.